Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You sent us a stack of sources detailing a very specific development in the financial technology space. And our mission today is, well, to give you the shortcut to understanding its full implications. We're diving deep into the intersection of intellectual property law and blockchain infrastructure. Our focus is the name Metal Blockchain. Now, when you look at that name, there's a small detail, maybe often overlooked, that registered trademark symbol, the little R in a circle. And, you know, in the high-stakes world of traditional finance, sometimes these tiny legal symbols carry, well, enormous weight. So today, we're unpacking what that official registration signals to banks, credit unions, regulators, and how it kind of validates the whole operational strategy of the company behind it, Metallicus.
That's exactly it. You know, for the average crypto user, maybe a trademark just seems like marketing fluff. But when we look at the source material, especially those investor reports, it's pretty clear the area is deliberate, it's strategic, it signals legitimacy, long-term viability, things that are just non-negotiable if you want institutional trust.
Okay, let's unpack this legal foundation first then. Metal Blockchain is now an officially registered trademark with the USPTO, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Now, historically, blockchain kind of came out of this desire for decentralization, right? Avoiding central entities. So why is getting this very traditional, maybe even bureaucratic piece of paper so critical? Especially for tech aiming to be like the next-gen banking infrastructure.
Yeah, it's important because institutional partners are fundamentally risk-averse, deeply so. They don't just ask, does the tech work? They ask, is the company behind it stable, predictable, legally defensible for the next 10, 20 years? That little registered trademark, it helps answer those questions. The sources point to basically 4 big implications of getting this official USPTO registration. The first one's pretty obvious. It's formal recognition, the highest level of IP protection in the US. But that leads right to the second implication, which is really crucial for a bank. Legal trademark protection.
Okay, hold on. Why does a bank care so much about trademark protection compared to, say, code security?
It's really about continuity of service. Think about it. If a bank, or maybe a credit union service organization, a CUSO, integrates Metal Blockchain into their core systems, that's a massive commitment, multi-year, huge investment. Now, imagine if the name, the brand itself, was legally vulnerable. If competitors could challenge it, if the company had to fight in court just to use its own name.
That introduces massive risk for the bank using it.
Exactly. Catastrophic existential risk for the financial institution. That symbol, it's like a legal shield. It guarantees a certain level of operational stability for the brand itself. So third, this registration validates that the company has a strong intellectual property strategy overall. It shows they're serious about a compliance-first approach across the board. The trademark isn't just a one-off filing. It signals a whole corporate commitment to meeting regulatory scrutiny.
So it's not just guarding the name itself, but proving you take all the regulatory details seriously, like the whole package.
Precisely. And that connects naturally to the fourth point, establishing a robust professional foundation for partnerships. Banks, regulated entities, they have really stringent vendor standards, really tough hurdles. If you haven't even legally secured your main brand name at the highest level,
you won't even get past the first check.
You fail the initial due diligence. Simple as that. The X is a kind of stamp, a stamp of maturity, of institutional credibility.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We hear compliance first thrown around a lot in crypto, but often it just means, basic KYCML. What makes this IP strategy different? And isn't there a risk here? This focus on compliance, legal stuff, centralization, the USPTO is a central authority. Doesn't that undermine the whole decentralized idea of blockchain?
That's a key tension, absolutely. And what the sources suggest is, well, it's a calculated choice. The value proposition they're offering here isn't really about radical decentralization. It's more about trust minimization, but delivered through compliant, predictable infrastructure. For institutions, the value is definitely in the efficiency and the security of the distributed ledger. But that benefit has to be wrapped in structures they understand, things that are familiar, legally defensible. So they're basically choosing to play within the existing framework to get mass adoption, that USPTO registration. It's kind of the price of admission to the regulated financial world.
Okay, so the legal box is ticked, shows strong intent. But intent isn't execution, right? So the real deep dive starts now. That Q2 2025 investor report you mentioned had specific evidence, operational readiness. We need to connect that little R to actual concrete steps. How are they executing? How are they making good on this promise of institutional readiness?
Right. The operational strategy laid out in the reports, it's highly specific, and it totally backs up the legal framework we just talked about. They're building bridges, not just isolated tech islands. Let's start with their partnerships and pilot programs. The sources say they're running 12 credit union pilots, focused on stablecoin functionality. And crucially, these are happening within sandbox environments.
Okay, sandbox environment. Sounds a bit playful, but in finance, that means something very specific, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Think of a sandbox as like a contained, highly regulated test zone. A credit union can test out new tech like a stablecoin payment rail without any risk to their live system.
Right. No risk to customer data, their regulatory standing.
Exactly. So having 12 active pilots, that shows real-world traction, and using sandboxes shows they respect the careful, incremental, risk-managed approach that regulated institutions have to follow. And furthermore, those partnerships are really strategic. They're actively expanding relationships with groups like the Go West Credit Union Association and Dell and CUSO.
Let's pause on CUSO for a sec. For listeners maybe not deep in financial infrastructure, what exactly is a CUSO, and why does partnering with them matter so much for getting mass adoption?
Good question. CUSO stands for Credit Union Service Organization. These are basically organizations owned by credit unions collectively. Their whole purpose is to provide shared services, specialized things like core processing, IT, compliance tools, stuff individual credit unions maybe can't afford or build themselves.
Ah, okay. So it's like a shared resource hub.
Exactly. So partnering with a CUSO is like an institutional shortcut. You can reach dozens, maybe hundreds of these community-focused institutions all at once. It's a major mechanism for scale. And working with them proves your tech is ready for, like, enterprise deployment.
Okay, so that ties the partnerships directly back to scale. Mass adoption by the existing players. They're fitting into the current infrastructure, not just trying to rip and replace it overnight.
All right, now let's shift to the tech itself, the underlying tech, because this is where the execution really seems to, well, shine. The reports talk about launching A-Chain with PulseVM. What is PulseVM? And why is that specific virtual machine supposedly optimized for banking, like the sources claim? Yeah, this is a really critical technical point. See, most major public blockchains use a general-purpose virtual machine, like the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. It's designed to run basically anything, right? Complex DeFi contracts, NFTs, games, and payments too. But that general-purpose nature often leads to unpredictable transaction times or non-deterministic outcomes. That's a total non-starter for banking.
Unpredictable is bad for banking.
Very bad.
Extremely bad. PulseVM is engineered differently, fundamentally. It has features like deterministic latency, optimized instruction sets designed only for high-throughput, predictable financial tasks. Think of a regular blockchain VM like a huge supercomputer running tons of random apps. PulseVM is more like a custom-built hardened calculator, designed specifically exclusively to process money transfers, asset tokenization, predictably, consistently, without interference from, unrelated apps running on the same chain. That predictable performance, it's an absolute must-have for regulated systems. Predictability. That's the key word there. If you're guaranteeing millions of transactions daily, yeah, you can't have random delays or weird outcomes. Okay, and that technical focus on banking then leads directly to interoperability. Sources mention integrating the Webauth wallet, okay, but crucially, FedNow compatibility. FedNow, that's the Federal Reserve's real-time payment system, new plumbing for U.S. finance, basically. Why is FedNow compatibility such a big deal? Like a monumental achievement that really validates this whole institutional strategy?
Well, FedNow is the new bedrock, like you said. And integrating with it, it's incredibly hard. You have to adhere to super strict technical standards, tough security protocols, real-time messaging specs. For a blockchain, this means bridging its distributed ledger world with a centralized government-run real-time settlement system.
That sounds challenging.
It is. To get that compatibility, Metal Blockchain has to provide clear, compliant interfaces, making sure all transactions flowing into or out of FedNow meet the standards the Fed requires, and the banks using it require. This isn't just like a simple software plugin, it's validation. It validates the network can handle the entire compliance stack needed for transactions touching the U.S. financial system's core clearing mechanisms. So combine PulseVM's optimization with FedNow readiness. You see the platform positioning itself as real infrastructure, not just some experimental tech layer.
Yeah, it really paints a picture, a foundation being laid for mass adoption by the established players who need both blockchain efficiency and traditional regulatory compliance. They need both.
Exactly. And if we tie all these threads together, look at the bigger picture. That trademark, it isn't just a minor detail. It's the legal frame around this whole infrastructure they're building. The source material actually used a very specific, very powerful phrase for it. It called it banking infrastructure engineered in the U.S.
Engineered in the U.S.
Yeah, and that phrase, it speaks volumes. It implies jurisdiction, compliance, a design philosophy tailored specifically to the U.S. regulatory environment, the U.S. market. They're building something that inherently respects the landscape U.S. banks operate in, which frankly is often ignored by more globally distributed or purely open source blockchain projects.
Right. And that really feels like the core takeaway here. You've got institutional pilots running. You have this fierce compliance focus baked right into the tech, like PulseVM. And now, full trademark protection securing the brand for the long haul. Metallicus is signaling really clearly this network is built to last, built to be a durable utility for traditional finance. That legal stability from it reassures banks the tech will be viable, defended for decades.
It's fascinating when you realize how these legal minutia become the actual bedrock for future scaling. For a bank, vendor risk management is absolutely paramount, defending the intellectual property. It removes a layer of existential risk that often plagues these newer decentralized projects. They can trust the name, the system, the technology's identity. It all remains stable, legally protected.
So we've basically followed the breadcrumbs from one little symbol, the E. We followed that signal to understand the deep institutional commitment it represents. And that symbol is backed up by real operational progress. A-Chain, the banking-focused PulseVM, active credit union pilots, crucial FedNow readiness. It really is like the essential handshake, isn't it, between future blockchain efficiency and the old school necessity of legal compliance.
And this brings up an important question really for you, the listener, to think about. If the foundational trust that big financial institutions need is built almost entirely on these strict, verifiable legal markers, like IP registration, like jurisdiction being a prime example. How is the whole global landscape of digital finance going to shift? If compliant sort of sovereign infrastructure like Metal blockchain solidifies its legal standing around the world. What other legal symbols, maybe ones we aren't noticing right now, specific certifications, licenses, jurisdictional claims, what will become the next big signals that dictate where institutional money flows, beyond just the tech specs of the blockchain itself?
That's a great point. The lesson seems clear. Watch the lawyers just as closely as you watch the developers. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into how legal frameworks are shaping tech adoption. We'll catch you next time.